Hello, everyone. It's humbling to be here. I just want to welcome Steve Brown from Rotary Foundation, who joined as an attendee. Steve was a mastermind behind my master's program, and also Rotary was the organization that sponsored my education. In addition, I'd like to welcome Zaida, who is my co-author. Welcome, Zaida. Zaida will be here listening and also simultaneously answering any questions you might be having in chat. So without any further ado, I'd try to share my screen.
Hi, Zaida. Welcome.
Can you all see my slides now?
Yeah, all good.
Great. So, desalination of the Caspian Sea water, will it quench Turkmenistan's thirst for water? These are preliminary studies for the policy brief. This is not research, so I'm not going to be inundating you with research methods and frameworks. Instead, what I'm going to do is that I am going to provide an awareness-raising background around water issues in Turkmenistan. This policy brief, which is currently in progress and in development, is co-authored by me, Jahan Taganova, as lead author, with significant contribution from Anna Shabanova, Zaida Aurora, Rachana Matur, and Jacqueline Best. So earlier in June, President of Turkmenistan, Serdar Berdimuhamedov, has charged Deputy Prime Minister Anagil Diaz-Muradov with the task of possibly constructing desalination plant to supply water to Ashgabat, which is currently experiencing severe water shortages. And in fact, in recent decades, desalination has emerged as techno-social fix to solve 21st century water issues as means to enhance water supply for domestic and municipal use. And interestingly enough, back in 2019, the World Resource Institute reported that Turkmenistan is on brink of water crisis, with severe shortages potentially looming in the coming years. In addition, Regional Meteorological Journal was reporting that Turkmenistan is experiencing water shortages in lower reaches of Amu Darya for 3 consecutive years. So knowing all this information and hearing about potential consideration of Turkmen government to construct a desalination plant in the Caspian Sea, I couldn't stand by with wealth of my knowledge that I obtained through Masters in Water Cooperation and Diplomacy. So together with my colleagues, water diplomats, water engineers, we decided to analyze this situation and perhaps see what are the possible solutions. Now, before we move any further, I'd like to let you know that water desalination cannot technically be tackled in isolation. It is very much integrated to Amu Darya Basin, which is basically that's where we are based as Turkmenistan, part of Amu Darya Basin, and this is the basin through which we receive our fresh water. But also we are looking at the desalination potential, so we need to look at Caspian Sea Basin as well. But beyond that, we also have other stakeholders that are influencing the Central Asian region, such as the European Union, the United States, Russia, and China. And all these dynamics in itself are also governed by laws, regulations, and agreements. For today's presentation, however, I would like really concentrate on Amu Darya Basin. And today's agenda as follows. First, I would try to shed light on how does Turkmenistan get its water. Then, I will contextualize that in climate change conversation and how climate change been impacting Caspian Sea already. After that, I would like to tackle the question if seawater desalination is a sustainable technology solution for Turkmenistan. And finally, we will look at some alternative solutions and recommendations that we are proposing collectively as writers of this policy brief. All right. So for some of you, what I'm about to say might be new information, but for others, it might be a repetition. But as Russian says, repetition is mother of learning. So to begin with, I would like to take you a little bit down to the history line. Let's move a little bit, rather briefly, to the Soviet era. In the Soviet era, water security was ensured through water energy exchange between the upstream and downstream countries. As you could see in the map here, upstream water-abundant countries are Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. These two countries provided water for irrigation in summer to downstream states, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. On its turn, downstream countries, which are rich in oil and gas, supplied energy to upstream countries. However, after the demise of Soviet Union, the former republics gained, obviously, their independence in 1991. And centrally planned water energy management system, which was established during the Soviet era, had to be reshaped toward market-oriented approaches. And water courses, which once were domestic under the Soviet Union, now became transboundary. The international agreements cover the use of Amu Darya, and these agreements allocate 36% of its annual flow to Turkmenistan. Bear in mind that only 1% of Amu Darya flow is formed on the territory of the country. With that, what I'm trying to say is that we're absolutely dependent on water resources, and specifically so on the water resources of Amu Darya. Yes, we do have other rivers such as Atrek, Murgab, Tejen, but in a grand scheme, if we're looking at the percentage of water and its utilization, it's rather scant as compared to Amu Darya. Groundwater makes up marginal part of Turkmenistan water uses. In total, there are 3 kilometers in cubic of groundwater reserves, of which only 1.3 are usable. And the total amount that actually we are using today is between 0.4 to 0.5. So some scholars says that in Turkmenistan, there are sufficient water resources, not only in Turkmenistan, but in entire region. However, the scarcity that we are experiencing is due to poor coordination and poor management. So currently, Central Asia is under strong environmental pressure, with global warming having a significant impact on hydrology of Central Asia. And it's really important to contextualize our discussions of water resource management, water scarcity in the context of climate change. Why? Because Amu Darya is entirely supplied by permafrost runoffs. Basically, right now on your screens, you are seeing Tian Shan Mountains from where Amu Darya is taking its water. And all those ice caps are actually the source of water. Due to climate change, the ice cap of Central Asia's Amu Darya and Sirdarya rivers are melting rapidly. Experts are predicting that permafrost melt, causing 15% of flow reduction by 2050 already. Yes, that's scary a little bit. And University of Geneva says that around 0.1 to 0.8% of glaciers in the Tian Shan Mountains melt away every year, leaving only 2/3 of glacier intact compared to a century ago. So we have only 2/3 of glaciers right now available in Tian Shan Mountains as we would compare a century ago. As a result, the Asian Development Bank estimated that the annual unmet water demand in the basin will increase from current 8.8% to 31.6 to 39.7% by 2050. Let's take a moment and breathe here. Because if we contextualize these percentages within the grand scheme of water management, it is becoming, to a certain extent, scary. And because of climate change, in recent years, heightened attention has been paid to water management and security in Central Asia. Warmer temperatures and more volatile weather patterns disrupt ecosystems and increase the frequency of extreme droughts, floods, mud flows, heat waves, among others. Temperature between 1990 and 2020 were at least 5 degrees Celsius higher than they were between 1960 and 1979, resulting in drier summers and more rainfall during the winter. Now, if we have among our audiences people in their 50s and 60s, they probably could attest how they've been experiencing these changes in front of their eyes. According to the World Bank, temperature is expected to rise by 5.1 degrees Celsius by the mid-2090s. So this means we're looking at 50 to 55 degrees Celsius, if not higher, for our future generation, for our children and grandchildren. Climate change and Caspian Sea. So what does that mean to Caspian Sea? Climate change is already increasing evaporation over the Caspian Sea, which is not balanced by river discharge or precipitation, making the leading driver of changes in the Caspian Sea level. So to put it plainly, we have a higher degrees temperature, evaporation is increasing, but that is not being balanced by water that comes from Volga River or the precipitation. And due to this, the Caspian Sea is already shrinking. It is experiencing a devastating decline in water levels. Currently, Caspian Sea, if you would look for the images from Google Map, you would definitely observe how it's shrinking. And it is estimated that Caspian Sea may disappear in 75 years if it continues to decrease by 7 centimeters a year. As a consequence of global warming and increased temperature, sea ice sheets are reduced, which in turn shrink the breeding grounds for the Caspian seal. Some resources say that 90% of Caspian Sea population was lost, and they are considered endangered species. It is important to point that seals play a crucial role in nutrient cycling, and their death would mean rather damaging consequences to the entire ecosystem of the Caspian Sea. Also, due to the shrinkage of Caspian Sea, we're losing vast shelves of the Caspian Sea, of the shallower waters, which are actually a habitat for birds and important fish species as sturgeon. Currently, there are numerous desalination projects that are happening on the Caspian Sea. For example, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and Iran having desalination plants. Now, Turkmenistan, according to some resources, already had a desalination plant on the Caspian Sea. But how construction of new desalination plant, what kind of impact is it going to have, was the question that posed some curiosity in me personally. So before we go to answer to this question, I'd like to explain what desalination is. Desalination is the process of removing salt, minerals, and contaminants from seawater to obtain fresh water. The states in the Middle East, in fact, pioneered the use of desalination, on a large scale for domestic water. Currently, there are two technologies: reverse osmosis, you can see it as depicted in the picture in the slide, as well as thermal processes. Of these two technologies, thermal desalination has been used in oil-rich countries of Gulf for decades now. However, there are some drawbacks in this method. Basically, what happens with thermal desalination is seawater is heated and the evaporated water is condensed to produce fresh water. This method demands lots of energy, and that in turn releases a large number of greenhouse gases. A relatively newer technology that is being utilized in desalination is reverse osmosis. In this method, seawater is pressed against a semi-permeable membrane that allows water to pass through, but it retains salts and bacteria. So it's relatively better, but a reverse osmosis technology still has significant room for significant improvement. However, at the same time, if we compare two technologies, a reverse osmosis desalination plant's recovery ratio, which is basically the volumetric process of efficiency of purification process, is much higher than the thermal technology. So there are, though, no matter which technique and technology we're looking to, there are significant drawbacks in both technologies. Thermoelectric energy is the main power source for water desalination plants, which results, as I just mentioned, in emission of greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, scholars and international community says that Turkmenistan is already considered the world's biggest emitter of methane and greenhouse gases. That is primarily due to natural gas and extraction of natural gas. And in fact, these gases, greenhouse gases and methane, are powerful global warming agents. On a good side, though, Turkmenistan ratified the Paris Agreement in 2016 and adopted an intended national determined contribution. Thus, Turkmenistan is committing to reduce greenhouse emissions on national scale by 2030. This is a fantastic news and fantastic progress. It is evident that Turkmen government is motivated to combat climate change in the next decade. And as Turkmen authorities are presently exploring seawater desalination options, they should consider installing renewable energy, such as wind and solar. And by the way, we have really good conditions in Turkmenistan to start investing more in renewable energy. So using renewable energy to power the desalination plants would minimize greenhouse emissions as a result of desalination process. But the drawbacks of desalination doesn't end here. The second biggest drawback is brine management. So the desalination process, as I told you previously, separates feed water into two different streams: fresh water, which is the output, and wastewater with high concentration of salts and chemicals, which is referred as brine. Brine disposal into surface water bodies can cause psychochemical alterations, such as increased salinity, increase in temperature, and accumulation of metals that can threaten ecosystem of the receiving water. To put simply, usually brine can be disposed right into the water, which means the Caspian Sea. And because it has so much concentration of salts, chemicals, and metals, it will be damaging the ecosystem of Caspian Sea, which is already being threatened. Brine underflows also deplete oxygen from receiving waters, which is, in combination with high salinity, can have a major negative impact on benefic organisms. Benefic organisms such as clams and worms and oysters and mussels that live on the seafloor. Contaminants and seawater quality is another big issue that comes with construction of desalination plants. Chemical in brine deteriorate the quality of receiving water when it is discharged into marine environment. For example, studies conducted in Red Sea among 21 desalination plants that are built across Red Sea estimated that 2,708 kilograms of chlorine, 36 kilograms of copper, and 9,000 kilograms of antiscalants are released each day into the sea. So, the Caspian has already been polluted significantly and deteriorated by major oil production sites and anthropogenic changes in coastal zones, which resulted in huge loss of Caspian Sea habitat among other species. As the new desalination plant is constructed, brine management will have to be seriously addressed in order to avoid further deterioration of sea's environmental condition and threatening its biodiversity. So all aspects considered, the current proposal of constructing desalination plant in the Caspian Sea to supply water to Ashgabat city would require fresh water to be transported to the capital sea, which is, if we would take Turkmen-Bashi Gulf, the distance between Turkmen-Bashi Gulf to Ashgabat would equate to approximately 570 kilometers. So in order to transport this fresh water all the way from Turkmen-Bashi, Caspian Sea, to Ashgabat, the capital city, substantial amount of infrastructure investment will be required, which could translate to higher cost of fresh water and could potentially drain the public budget. If desalination is rashly implemented on the basis of its short-term solution without sufficient awareness of the context in which it's being implemented, there is a risk of facing major ecocide of the magnitude of Aral Sea, which dried up. Therefore, a comprehensive analysis of all options, including conservation and efficiency, should be conducted by water planners, water agencies, and policymakers in order to pursue less expensive, less environmentally damaging alternative. Should planners and policymakers decide to design and construct desalination facilities, they should use estimates of future, not the present, of climate change and the future condition of Caspian Sea, its ecological condition. That would be important to think ahead of time. So, you would ask me, should Turkmenistan consider desalination to increase its water supply? Our answer of all scholars who've been working on this policy brief is probably we should not. And if Turkmenistan does decide to move forward with desalination plant, what costs are going to be? All aspects considered, Caspian might face the fate of Aral Sea. And in this picture, in screen, you will see an old ship standing in the middle of desert. But that wasn't a desert. That was an Aral Sea. Not long time ago, by the way. So, what are our recommendations? Obviously, there are things we could do now to address water shortages. First recommendation that we, the scholars, water engineers, and water diplomats put forward is using integrated irrigation management practices to improve the water use efficiency. So, will translate a little bit and contextualize. According to the World Bank, about 91% of water withdrawn from the rivers of Turkmenistan is used for agriculture purposes, whereas industrial and domestic uses account for 7% and 2% respectively. Techniques such as drip irrigation, irrigation scheduling, crop rotation, and cover crops are ways farmers could save the water. Second, we could look at the adjustment of crop mix. If we would take a step back and go back into the Soviet times, in the era of Khrushchev looked at the entire Central Asia as a virgin lands. And in fact, it implemented Virgin Lands campaign in 1950s. What does that mean for newer Generation Z of Turkmenistan? Back in 1950s, Moscow expanded agricultural development in Central Asia by 88.6 million hectares on the basis of concept called cotton first. Thus, cotton cultivation became an important economic activity in Central Asia, including Turkmenistan. Cotton, there are actually debates around whether cotton is a water-thirsty crop mix or not. We are going through the assumption that it is. In 2017, cotton represented 6.2% of Turkmenistan's total exports after hydrocarbons. So in general, 6.2 is not such a big percentage. And therefore, we advise to change the crop. Recommendation 3, retrofitting and improving current water infrastructure. Retrofitting and improving water infrastructure is another way to boost efficiency in water supply operations. Turkmenistan's infrastructure quality, according to the Index Infrastructure Indicator, is weak. It's scoring only 2.23 out of 5. This is in fact on par with Kyrgyz Republic and slightly better than Tajikistan. So in the grand scheme, we're not doing that bad as we would compare to our upstream water-rich neighbors. However, Turkmenistan can do better. We can reduce water leakage, water contamination, and overuse of water retrofitting and modernizing the existing water infrastructure. This would also lower the energy and gas consumption of urban population, and thus not only improve water efficiency, but lower energy and gas consumption. Recommendation number 4, implementing nature-based solutions. Turkmenistan should consider adopting more nature-based solutions in order to address water shortages and climate change, to sustainably manage and store natural resources and modify ecosystem. As you might have observed, in recent years, Turkmenistan was experiencing extreme rainfalls events, and it is increasing as a result of climate change. The statistics that we found says that flash floods, mud flows, and heavy rainfalls increased during 1986 and 1995, but we're again facing that in recent years. So, Turkmenistan could contain mud flows by building retaining walls and hydraulic infrastructure in the foothills of the mountain systems, and adding plant ground cover on the slopes to stabilize the land. In addition to protecting residential buildings from descending mud flows and seals, what we call Silivi Patoki, nature-based solution will also provide an alternative solution for harvesting water for irrigation. To this end, nature-based solution can address water scarcity challenges effectively and adaptively, while also benefiting human well-being. Recommendation 5, stormwater harvesting during the wet season. As you know, from January to April, We still receive some rain in Turkmenistan, and during this time, stormwater harvesting could provide another alternative option to meeting water demands. Recommendation number 6, using recycled water. And when you think about recycled water, I immediately think of Singapore, how excellently it implemented this system that it's not depending that much on upstream countries. So recycled water is made from purifying wastewater. It passes through multiple treatment processes, make it safe for non-consumptive uses such as agriculture and other uses such as watering city gardens, park, supplying water for our fountains in Ashgabat city. Recommendation number 7, enhancing regional collaboration and dialogue. As I told you in the beginning of this presentation, according to current data, there are sufficient water resources in the region, but there is a poor governance framework and weak institutional capacity, which creates challenges in the entire Amu Darya basin. Considering Turkmenistan's current situation, it is going to be important to join the efforts with our upstream countries and neighbors in Central Asia and encourage dialogue, regional cooperation, and collaboration to address complex and interrelated challenges. To this end, programs from which I graduated, master's degree in water cooperation and diplomacy, would be pivotal because this kind of majors are very scarce right now. That means we have really a few handful of specialists across entire Central Asia who can mitigate conflicts, be the negotiators. While we have plenty of engineers, we really need people with soft skills. And recommendation number 8, is changing people's perception of water and individual water stewardship. I, as somebody in my mid-30s, been growing up with saying, "Kapля vody, krupitsa zolota," a drop of water is drop of gold. However, that does not necessarily mean that this ideology and concept with which a new generation is growing up. Therefore, it's important to revisit school materials and, in general, to reassess what is people's perception of water, how are they stewarding and guarding our water. Thank you, Tawalan. And on this note, my son Kishmish asks you if you have any questions to me. Thank you.